had a great run on Facebook. And then suddenly it was like, this doesn't work.
You guys grew really quickly, obviously acquiring market share, growing in terms of headcount, over 300 staff by the time you IPO'd.
The more you pay for a customer, the worse they behave. There's a phrase that like done is better than perfect, and speed is really important. When you talk about marketing, I think you break it into 3 pillars, right? You have acquisition, retention. We went as hard and fast as we could without breaking any of our core metrics. Surround yourself with people that can help. Talk to you, engage a mentor. Don't do it on your own. It can be quite lonely out there. So I would say try and do it with a mate, because then you get to share in the ups and the downs. That's fun.
What would just your one word of advice be to people that are thinking of starting their first business?
You've got to really want to do it or believe in your product. I think if you're doing it because you think it's going to be a quick win, it's not going to work.
All right, guys, our guest today is an extremely experienced and impressive individual. He's worked across all levels of business, from the head of marketing for Rockstar Games, working on projects like Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, through to co-founding Marley Spoon, growing that company from nothing into 300 plus employees and doing an IPO, all the way through to having his own startup, bootstrapped e-com brand. So it was great to be able to pick his brain about what really moves the needle in business. Spent a lot of time talking on startups and that scaling process, and on performance marketing and how to actually scale a business. So super valuable for anyone in business or thinking of starting their own. So stay tuned for this one. Watch all the way through to the end, because there's some really good information all the way throughout, and I wouldn't want you guys to miss out. So we'll get into it in a second, but before we do, can I ask some favors from you guys? If you're watching this on YouTube, could you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It literally takes 2 seconds and it really helps me out. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could leave me a 5-star review, I'd really appreciate it. The bigger the podcast gets, the better the guests are, as you guys can see. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Let's get into it. All right, we have a very impressive individual on the podcast today. Now, he's a serial entrepreneur known for his journey from startup inception to successful IPO. Now, we have a lot of different people from business, from startups, and sometimes we've had a few, and you're another one of these very impressive individuals that, yes, have real startup experience, but have also worked in some really large, massive, like, international companies as well. So really great perspective on leadership and business and scaling that we'll get into today. So for those that don't know, our guest, Dave Malcolm, he's the co-founder of Marley Spoon and Dinnerly, a company which you grew from startup to over 300 staff before you did a successful IPO and exit. You're also the co-founder, COO and CMO of your latest venture, Mist, which I'm really looking forward to discussing in this podcast as well today. And just on some of those other roles that you've had with some really recognizable brands in Australia and around the world, I definitely want to touch on your time at Rockstar Games. Obviously, the creators, Yui's reaction as soon as I said that. Obviously, creators of Red Dead Redemption series and Grand Theft Auto, probably the most successful gaming series I've ever made, and also Merivale, which is one for the Aussies as well, probably the premium hospitality group in Australia. So sure, there's been a lot of lessons along your way. For the people that are listening at home as well, we have a lot of e-com founders, a lot of people that are startup or even just growth focused people. So doing my research on you, I've got a lot of notes, as people know I do. There's going to be tons of value in this episode. I know that already. And just so people get a bit of an idea, I feel like where this conversation will go, who knows exactly, but it's going to be really focused on startups and scaling and performance marketing, some of the things you're really well known for. So Dave, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for giving us your time. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, really good. So let's start from the beginning. We're going to go through your journey, all the biggest lessons you've learned along the way, and I really want to kind of get into your head as well. Like, we were just chatting for 5 minutes off air. Like, you're someone with more experience than me. I love being able to pick your brain and get some of your experiences, perspectives that are, years beyond mine. Now, starting from the start of your professional career in Australia, that time you worked at Rockstar Games, is that a job that you had secured before you moved over? Did you move over for this, or did you hit Australia, then you figured it all out from there?
Yeah, so it was quite fortuitous. I moved to Australia, and actually when I got here, I was DJing at Home Nightclub.
I love it, in Darling Harbour.
Yeah, which was quite random.
Yeah.
And through that, I met a bunch of people who used to come along to the club, and I became friends with this guy. And he knew that I really had a marketing background. I was taking a bit of a hiatus doing DJing, and I needed to get back into the workforce in Australia. He happened to be the head of PR at Rockstar Games.
Okay.
And again, sliding doors, he was like, your DJing's all right, but I hear you're quite good at marketing.
Yeah.
And so he invited me to join that business. And, you know, as a fan of pop culture, video games, you know, the opportunity to work for Rockstar, as you alluded to, they're a pretty phenomenal organization and brand. So I jumped at the chance. So I started off doing a bit of product management there. I ended up being the head of marketing and PR for nearly 8 years. Wow. And as you mentioned, looked after pretty much all of the big games. I was pretty lucky, from, you know, GTA 3 re-releases on the PlayStation 2 all the way to GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption. And, you know, a pretty cool experience working for a big brand. Very different to the experiences that you and I have sort of gone through in the last few years when you're like trying to build a brand which has no brand equity. It's very different when you're working for a brand like Rockstar because it opens doors. So, you know, when you're talking to back in the day, dare I say it, magazines, you know, that's how old I am. And when we're looking at like, how do we do marketing for a global brand, it's very different to what I've learned over the years, and, you know, a bit more of the hustle of how to get an e-com brand or a startup out there. But yeah, amazing experience. I feel very lucky to have done it. I ended up leaving because I was kind of desperate to do my own thing. You know, sometimes when I watch the announcements and the trailers coming through, I think it would still be fun to be there. But I don't think, I mean, I think, you know, you're probably similar. I don't think I could do the same thing for 20 years.
No, exactly. Like 7 years at one company, obviously it was Rockstar, so I'm sure it was like very rewarding and challenging. But 7 years, if you've got the entrepreneurial bug, you're going to get itchy fingers. You're going to want to go in and take the next step and do things for yourself. But from that, like 7 years working at an organization at that level, obviously you alluded to the fact that they're very different in the way they operate to startup culture. Is there much that you learnt from your time at Rockstar that you've been able to apply in more startup land where you've continued your career since then?
So I think, you know, one of the things was actually just network. So when you're running a brand that big, you get to see and meet a lot of people in the media landscape.
You get the access, right?
So you get access. So that was very lucky when it came to having to pull in favors, as we do later on. You kind of know who's who in the zoo when it comes to getting stuff done. In terms of the actual marketing approach, though, it's very different because what you tend to do with those big brands is you're localizing global content, which is fine. It works well for video games. It doesn't work well for other products. You know, it didn't work. Well, it's harder to do with something like Marley Spoon. You know, an ad for food in the US is very different for an ad for food in Australia.
Completely different.
And I think, you know, people need to be really cognizant of that, is that Australians have a particular sense of humor. They engage with media in a particular way. You can't get away with that in other countries. But I guess some of the big lessons were really about the absolute attention to detail. Like the guys at Rockstar were fanatical about everything. So the front of the box, the poster, the placement, you know, not just the actual game, the product. So I think, you know, one of the lessons learned there really was that, and it sounds a bit corny, but like retail is detail. It's something, and it's like, and, you know, that was a video game, but we were still dealing with retailers, you know, your EB Games, your JB Hi-Fis, and so on. And getting it right in store was really important. So I think learning and being mentored by, you know, the founder, like Sam and Dan Houser, who invented Grand Theft Auto, they would just, like, everything had to be just right. Yeah. And I think there's a big lesson to be learned there. It's actually worth sweating the small stuff.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, like, because in startup land, a lot of people will preach speed and speed and like speed to market and like MVPs is some really important principles as well. But when it comes to, like, you know, you're building a business and you're starting to have success and you're bringing people in, how do you communicate the value of attention to detail? Because I know some people can question, is these little 1%ers that are going to take however many hours to execute on really worth it? How do you kind of communicate the value of those things when you're building out a team and it's not just the leadership team or the founders anymore?
Yeah, so I think in startups, you're right, but I'm permanently conflicted by this, and I think, you know, there's a phrase that, like, done is better than perfect, right? And speed is really important, particularly, you know, in some e-commerce areas. Well, it depends on your vertical, but getting market share as fast as possible and having first mover advantage is great. I think some products are forgiving and some products aren't, right? So releasing a beta version of an app and just go, hey guys, this is for testing, it's not quite right, that's okay.
Yep.
It's not okay if you're sending someone a meal and it's a chicken stir fry and the chicken's not there. Do you know what I mean? So, I think it is very use case dependent.
Yep.
I think in terms of marketing and messaging and content, of course, you're always going to optimize and refine that process, right? So the governance around, optimizing and excellence in that can come. And I think speed there is important.
Yeah.
When you're working for a well-established brand, you try not to cut corners. But yeah, it's always a sort of a bone of contention, particularly when you're building tech products, because developers don't like to be rushed at all.
As you can see with the new Grand Theft Auto game, they've been working on it for like a decade by the time it'll come out, probably more.
Yeah, and they have no problem with slipping that game. They'll go, when it's ready, it's ready.
Yeah,
right?
clearly.
But for us in like a startup world, you don't have the capital to do that. You probably don't have the patience of your customers. So I think there's dare I say it, a grey area.
Yes.
And I don't really like grey areas, being a data-focused marketeer and leader. But I think you've just got to take it by case basis.
For sure. And just before we move on to some of the startups that you've worked on, paint the picture, because I know there'd be a lot of people curious, myself included, Yui definitely as well. When you get a brief and you're working on something as big as a Grand Theft Auto or a Red Dead Redemption, for your role when you're like the head of marketing for the business, I'm not sure if that was globally or for the APAC region, what does that look like? Like, how do you market something so big that you're not trying to acquire, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million of sales? Like, you're trying to aim for the absolute moon. What does that look like? How do you plan for that? Yeah. And then how does the execution get fed down to the rest of the team?
Yeah, great question. It's very, very complicated and it's very, very simple in the same way. Is that I think marketing in essence, and I talk about this a lot, is very binary in some way. You need to make sure that your product is mentally available for people. They know it exists, and then they need to be able to buy it, right? When you're looking at a complicated rollout for a global product, though, you do the same thing. You look at the total addressable market. You look at how you're going to reach that market. The messaging tends to be defined by global around the assets being the posters or the trailers. And so we didn't really get to touch too much of that, talking specifically about Rockstar.
Yep.
And then it's like very, very complicated media buying. But again, only complicated in as much with a brand like Rockstar, it was kind of like, we just buy everything. It was kind of like a bit of a cheat's paradise, right? Because the budgets are very big. You're only in market for maybe 4 weeks every 4 years. So you can go really big and hard. It's way, way more refined now because the performance marketing element, you can pretty much predict your day one sales by trailer views, right? It's the same as movies. So movies will aggregate all of their trailer views and they can pretty much predict their day one box office by region. And it's the same with entertainment products, broadly speaking. If you've done a great job of the pre-sale, be it the trailer, the teaser, you know where it's going to go. The other thing with Rockstar specifically is dealing with the retailers. So yes, there's downloadable content. It's moving into a digital space, but the majority of the units were still being sold attached to consoles in store. So we spent a lot of time working with Sony, PlayStation, Microsoft, and then the big box retailers. So there was quite a heavy behind the scenes sales process. I was kind of lucky because I got to sit across both sides of it. But yeah, those campaigns, we would plan for a year and then it would all be over in 4 weeks.
So with that point you mentioned about how they're able to pretty accurately predict like their launch day one revenue for a film or a game, how does that work? Is it like they know like a percentage of trailer views will convert to either buys or views if it was an entertainment product?
Yeah, so there's two steps. There's exactly that one. So you build a baseline over time, and there's a correlation between you call it buzz or clout or literally the hardcore metrics around viewership.
Yeah.
And the other one is pre-order. So, you know, a great trick that lots of e-commerce brands will use as well, but big brands and big releases do it as well. Movies don't, but games is all about the pre-order. So again, you've kind of got really strong consumer sentiment about it before you launch. And that's really important as well for manufacture, right? So you know how much you have to ship and deliver into store in advance.
And so from that time at Rockstar, obviously that was, early 2000s through the noughties up to like early. When did you leave Rockstar? When would it have been just before 2010 or?
Yeah, 2008, 9.
Yeah, because the role of data, and you talk about being a very data driven marketer, right? How has data changed over, the last 15 years since you left? Like the data you'd have at your disposal today compared to back then is like worlds apart.
Oh, it's wild. Yeah. So I think, like I sort of alluded to, the marketing we were doing was like big brand marketing. So attribution's really hard. The only attribution you got was off your, literally YouTube or pre-sale data. Whereas now, we have the luxury of being able to say, like, if you can't measure it, don't do it, pretty much, in the performance space. But yeah, I think the way of buying has entirely changed because, with a big brand like Rockstar, you're buying TV, pre-roll, outdoor, transit, all of that. It is measurable these days, but it's never really one-to-one.
It's not like a science. Like it's not down like anything digital, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you speak to a big media agency, they'll tell you it's a science, but I think we all know that there's a big bucket of vagary.
There has to be, right? Regardless of how good you think your data is. That's just reality.
And then I think for me, like there were a lot of learnings in that, but really my approach to data marketing and performance marketing changed at Marley Spoon. Yeah. Because that was absolutely, to the minute, to the cent for spend globally. We have KPI dashboards running daily, much more in line with what we would expect today. My whole kind of, that was a huge learning curve for me. Really understanding how to stack channels, how to scale out of particular channels, how channels work together. And I think, again, the data gives you the freedom, right? Because ultimately you can then operate in a, not risk-free, but you can de-risk your spends. And,
exactly,
when you're spending significant amounts of money with Meta or on free-to-air TV, you have to have that data because, you just can't take the risk.
Just a quick one from me. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'd know that after scaling Happy Skin Co. to over $10 million per year, I spent close to 18 months creating the Viral Brand Builder program, which teaches someone with zero experience how to launch and scale their very own e-commerce brand. With over 100 training videos and direct access to me, including one-on-one calls, you'll be guided throughout the entire process. Now, we already have a bunch of incredible results from students that are making multiple 5 and 6 figures per month. So if you want to learn how to build a business that has the potential to completely change your life, then click the link in the description and book in an application call today. Spots are limited as you'll be speaking directly to me. So hopefully I'll chat to some of you soon. But until then, let's get back to the podcast. And that piece, like for any startup, whether you've got funding or you're completely bootstrapped, your marketing budget in the first 6 months, like there better be a bang for their buck for it because it's like you got a finite runway, right? If you don't figure out how to make this convert or return at whatever number you need, that's like most businesses don't even get past that stage if they can't figure out their marketing. So it's a really important piece. Moving on to like the Marley Spoon journey, and like you talk a lot about performance marketing, and that's a term that gets thrown around a lot by agencies today. For you, like what's your definition of performance marketing? Yeah.
That's a good question. It kind of gets bandied around a bit. I mean, I would argue that all marketing is performance marketing, right? So I kind of have it attached to my name or what I talk about, but ultimately, some of it is attitudinal, right? So do we have the correct process and governance in place for every dollar spent to understand the impact? That's performance marketing, right? But, with the brands, like you would have seen it, Australians would have seen locally how brands like that market themselves. There's door to door. There was, back in the day, there's handing out flyers at the train
Letterbox
station.
drops,
Letterbox
all that
drops,
stuff.
absolutely huge, massive conversion. But again, when you're dealing with something like food, it's not that simple, but everyone eats, right? So when you start, it's kind of quite broad. So you can have, and you should have, the same level of governance around the performance of a letterbox drop as you should about your display or your PPC. And so for me, the performance thing is really like all marketing is performance marketing. It comes down to the structure and the governance of how you do that. And, unfortunately, it requires a lot of work and, a lot of people poring over spreadsheets. And obviously there's a lot of tech now that can assist with that. But, we were running Marley Spoon like daily, manually off sheets for years because you just got better clarity. The closer as a marketeer you are to the data, the better.
And for anyone like listening that's in e-com, performance marketing is everything you do. Like it has to be, right? And that's where as well, like some people be like, no, it's brand, no, it's direct result marketing. Like what, can you do both at the same time? What's your thoughts on that? Like, can you brand and go after direct result at the same time? Or do you think they're standalone pieces of content?
So I think, look, it's a great question. I think when you talk about marketing, when I talk about it, I think you break it into three pillars, right? You have acquisition, retention, and brand. And brand is definitely not like the logo and the color, right? The brand is, the unified human truth, the messaging, where it comes into the engagement life cycle. So I think you can do both, but you need to be careful because does buying brand, and I'm not talking about the definition in like business manager of like what's brand, what's not, but buying brand can sometimes be hard to attribute, right? So, and like, I know this sort of inside out as you're sitting there sort of smiling at me, but I think what you have to do is you build a buffer. So you have your attribution lens, you set it, you understand it. Hopefully you do some post-funnel qual research that you can feed back into your attribution. I think you can do both, but it certainly requires thinking and planning, particularly with the brand assets that are, where do they sit? Are they retention really, or at what point in the funnel do they sit? So look, I think it can be done, but I think you also shouldn't be scared to have marketing assets in the market that are brand. Yeah. Ultimately, brand is, I don't know, again, it's conflicting. Brand is everything as well, but that could come down to amazing customer success. In e-com, it could be, your returns policy could be like one of the most amazing things about your brand, or the mechanics, right? It doesn't just need to be the big shiny ad.
Exactly. And it is difficult. Like I obviously come from it a lot from the e-commerce lens. And I think like if you're a startup e-commerce brand, I think like your focus needs to be on performance and conversion, right? And like you do that in a consistent and tasteful way where you're not like, the homeware stores that's 80% off every time you walk in. I think you do that consistently. It does build brand anyway. And I think it needs to be your focus. Once you're a little bit bigger, then you can have a little bit more flexibility with like telling stories, and like a brand that comes to mind that does brand really well is Coca-Cola. Like they don't even try and sell Coke. They sell them like they sell the feeling, right? So there are some brands that do it really well, but I think for e-commerce, going back to what you said, it is really important to be everything data driven. And like you said, even in terms of the business manager attribution of like, let's do a branded campaign, it can be difficult to like blend that in with the rest of your results and really figure out the value. But you spoke about that approach to like data and like understanding the return from every dollar you invest in the business. You guys launched that business before we had some of these software and tools available that could help do that for you. For someone that's in e-commerce and has a business that's doing really well, let's just say they're the founder and they happen to be, the one running their ads, like they got the good skill for that. How do you go about, like, how did you guys go about starting to build these dashboards so you know what the important KPIs and numbers you need to be looking at are each day? Because it can be for someone that has no experience, and that could be a very, daunting thing. Like, how do I build this dashboard? What do I put into it?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, we built everything manually to start with. So I alluded to, like, we would have a KPI dashboard, which was, literally a Google sheet or an Excel file with all of the key metrics by day. So acquisition, conversion rate, retention, drop off, all of these things by channel, by day. So I think the first thing about building a dashboard is don't worry about what it looks like. Just make sure it's actually showing you the right data. So identify what your North Star metrics are, or those key KPIs that you actually care about, and make sure that they're measured, right? And make sure they're true, and then build out a consistent way of inputting that data manually, tedious. But, now we used a product called Gecko Board, which is quite fun. You can obviously use, Data Studios, Looker. There's so much out there to make it easy now. But, the data is not relevant unless it's relevant to you. So I would urge all these people to, obviously, you've got to keep a really, really tight look at your spend. And particularly in e-com, if you're being aggressive, what's your run rate? But identify what those KPIs and metrics are for you, and don't overcomplicate it, because you can always add another one, right? So get the core like 5 ones that you want to look at daily, and then you can build that out over time. And then I think also when you're adding different channels to the mix, as you scale out of, maybe Meta, and you need to start adding other things, it's really critical to understand the dependencies between the two, right?
Speaking about the kind of gray areas, and like as you have like a multi-channel approach, offline and online, how, I guess, with how much accuracy and scrutiny can you place on the attribution of a certain channel versus the blended ROAS of the whole business? What's your kind of ethos with that? And is it different business to business?
I think it is different business to business. I think one of the key things is take a view on it, be confident, and leave it for a while. So don't tinker with your attribution endlessly. Give yourself a good run at getting it right, because then at least your baseline is right. So then if you can measure ROAS, but say you're measuring your top line CPA, right? You know that whatever happens underneath, if you break that, you've got a problem, right? So that's okay. So, but then you can start to understand the dependencies and the optimization within that underneath. So if, a particular channel is blowing out, you can then go and like get forensic on it and see what's going on. And of course, there's a myriad of reasons. Could be seasonal, could be creative, and then you have, you go and fix that problem. But I think the way to do it is, have a view on it, understand that it's going to be wrong, basically. You might have a view, I might have a view, we all might have a slightly different opinion, but we kind of agree, and then off we go. And then you revisit it every now and again. And I think that's important. Baselines are really important, I think, when it comes to measurement, particularly when you're throwing in, as you mentioned, you're suddenly doing outdoor. Right, great. So now how are we actually going to measure that? So, it's obviously not a direct code to conversion, but you're going to see your other channels increase or decrease. So, you geo-lock it. So you do, a big campaign in Melbourne. You check all your other metrics. You check, is your top line CPA intact? What's going on? Then ideally you would do a brand dip. If you can afford it, you'd go out and basically do a dip, measure awareness, all the fairly standard stuff. But, as a small startup, you don't have that resource available to you. So, you're not spending money on research. You might be lucky enough to do a little bit yourself, but it's not going to give you national coverage. So
that's really good to hear you break it down and explain like that. I've never done anything, outdoor. Everything I've done has been digital in one way, shape, or another, whether it be content or an ad or an influencer, whatever it may be. So just so I can understand it, because like a lot of businesses that listen are doing quite well, and I've got a lot of friends that have businesses that have been quite successful, and they're getting to the stage as well where it's like, okay, we want to step out of our traditional marketing channels and see what impact, things like outdoor could have. So just so I'm like people can understand the following. So let's just say you've got your numbers nationally for Australia, you got your baseline and you got your baselines there, so you can see where the numbers usually are. Then you would go to someone like Melbourne and you'd activate a bunch of outdoor and see what those numbers do in terms of an incremental increase or decrease in Melbourne versus the other states as like a control, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can do that, that's the most sensible way to do it.
Yeah.
I think, it's interesting when you start talking about adding other channels to the mix. You've got to do I still think that you have to do the basic work, right? So, what is the near to far messaging strategy, right? Because as soon as you start spending big money on outdoor, you want to have all that dialed in. So you're testing all of that online, right? So you're essentially taking your best performing creative that you know works online. You'll then replicate that, refactored into some outdoor. And then, you have to do these sort of gated tests. Again, it needs to be big enough to work. Mm-hmm. So by city is a nice way to do it. In Australia, we're really lucky with how that works because we have, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. They all work slightly differently, dynamically, of course. Different weather, outdoor in Brisbane's not great. Transit in Melbourne's really strong. Sydney kind of has everything. But that's definitely the way to do it.
I want to talk about that scaling journey that you went on with Marley Spoon, but just to kind of put some context, I know you were at Rockstar for a little bit over 7 years, loved that experience, but you're like, obviously I want to go and do my own thing. What's that period in between? Like, how does the idea come to you for Marley Spoon? Is it yours or someone approach you, say, I've got this idea, I need someone with your skill set to partner? Yeah. How did it actually happen?
Yeah, so it wasn't, it was exactly that, but I'll sort of talk you through it. So I had a mentor, which I think is, really important.
Oh, it's the best.
And I had this guy, he's called Dan Yarosh is his name. He was the head of digital at BCG. He was an e-commerce guy. He did a business called Brands Exclusive, which they exited, did very well. He lived around the corner from me, and I used to see him at the park with our kids. And so I kind of had a sense of who he was, but not really. But we were just like, standing in the park on a Friday afternoon, having a beer, watching the kids run around. And I was doing a bunch of stuff. Like I was building websites. I had a small marketing agency. I was just trying to figure out how to start a business. Mm-hmm. And I kept on, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And he literally was like, Dave, your ideas are rubbish, mate. Okay. Like, very, very matter of fact. And I was like, okay, what should we do? And he's like, well, have you heard of HelloFresh? And I was like, yeah, I'm a customer. I use that. And he was like, right. So, Rocket Internet, what they do is they kind of, they take existing brands, they spin them up with scale, they kind of copy the idea. It's like, well, we could do a Rocket Internet to Rocket Internet. And he was like, he knew a guy in Berlin who was the ex-CEO of Delivery Hero, which interestingly, Australia was the only region that Delivery Hero failed in. And they were like, right, we're going to spin up a HelloFresh competitor. Yeah. And it was far more like putting a band together of the right people rather than coming up with like, sitting in the dorm room, great idea kind of thing. It was like, right, Rolf, who was my co-founder in that business, really, really strong on operations. I was the marketing guy. We hired a chef. Literally, there were two of us. And we sat down. We flew over to Berlin to meet the people who were funding the business. They liked us and said, here's some money. Here's a website in German. Go back to Australia, launch the business as fast as you can. And so he landed back in April. I remember it because it was my birthday. And then we spun up the business in about 6 weeks.
6 weeks?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was pretty hectic. I was like trying to translate a website. I was doing the MailChimp. I set up the Google ads. Then we were like, we need boxes. We had recipes that we were printing out. We did all the shopping at the supermarket, packed all the boxes ourselves. I delivered the boxes myself. And that was kind of really early days.
Yeah.
And then
what year was it that you launched? Sorry.
It was 2008.
Okay. Yeah.
I think. And then, is that right? I don't want to get that right. Yeah. And then.
Do I have it in my notes now?
I do. I should know. I've eradicated it from my mind. And then we did.
It all becomes a blur after a while, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everything's just like shit. Yeah, I remember doing that, but God.
And then one of the cool things as well that I'm a big fan of, which is I love doing markets.
Okay.
So we went to Bondi Markets and we set up a stand and I signed up the first 10 customers myself at Bondi Markets. We only did it once, but it was like we wanted to get like dirty, and get close to the product. So we signed up our first 10 customers.
What did you learn from that experience? Like, what were the people? What did people love about the idea? What was the resistance?
Yeah, I think it was, there was kind of, it was like, are you aware of this concept? oh yeah, there's that other brand. And then there was a lot of like, we're going to do it better.
Yeah.
Why? This is why, different food, slightly different recipes. I think the cool thing is though, and again, it sounds a bit like trite, doesn't it? But if you can actually speak to real customers as much as possible, it's amazing because they'll tell you weird things that you would never find out. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was pretty meaningful. What days they cook, who in the household cooks and who buys the food. What their kids eat, what their kids don't eat. Do they cook at the same time? All these kind of weird anecdotal things that you can just ask someone. Like, do you cook for your kid before you cook for yourself? Do you eat in front of the TV? Or do you eat at the dining room table? All these things, you can just get it real quick.
That closeness to customers, like I recommend for any founder, like at least for the first full year, you have to be in it because you learn so much from your customers. Now, something I wanted to ask is, I'm potentially jumping a little bit ahead, but we'll definitely spend more time on this. Dinnerly, was that something you had planned from the start, or was that something built off the back of customer feedback?
Yeah, exactly. It was customer feedback and research. So if you think of the easiest analogy is that Dinnerly is Jetstar, and Marley Spoon is Qantas, right? And so it was a price play. So we wanted to be more affordable, to open up the addressable market to Australian families. And what we found out is that Marley Spoon was, we had kind of accidentally positioned it as a bit fancy. And so people were like, it's too complicated. I just want to eat.
Yeah.
But I want to eat healthy. I don't know. And we found that out through a lot of research, right? And so it was like, right, well, let's do something with less ingredients, less washing up. This is a big one, right? 2 pans, still healthy. So the food procurement side is the same. The chicken that goes into Marley Spoon is the same as the chicken that goes into Dinnerly. But it was a convenience play and a price play. And it was so much fun doing it because also we kind of had the Marley Spoon brand that we'd been taking relatively seriously, working with people from MasterChef and stuff like this. And now it's like, we can just do what we want and have fun with it.
I'm interested in that. When you guys launched, did you find in terms of geographically where the customers were coming from both brands, was it really mixed all throughout Sydney, or was Marley Spoon more like, say, eastern suburbs and Dinnerly more western Sydney, or was it all blended? What was the kind of geographical split from that?
So I think the assumption initially was that eastern suburbs and the marginally wealthier neighborhoods would buy Marley Spoon. The price point is higher. And so I kind of assumed that Dinnerly might outreach more. Mm-hmm. So the other thing is that you have some logistical constraints, right? Like you still need to ship that food around the country. Like we solved that by building lots of manufacturing hubs, like factories all over the place. So that assumption actually got dispelled, and we found that people were just now swapping in between. So if they which is fine, right? But if it came down more to, I think, taste and convenience, that the Marley Spoon customers, actually Dinnerly is such an amazing product because it's simple, and you might do something more complicated on a Thursday, Friday night. So it wasn't actually as regional as I thought. Yeah. And I love both the brands, but I cook Dinnerly every day.
Yeah, it's just it's so funny. I used to have HelloFresh. Yeah. And then I swapped to Dinnerly actually. Yeah. And this is back when I was living by myself, so I had to cook myself, and obviously anything that can save me time and convenience. What do you think it was that inadvertently positioned Marley Spoon as this fancy, slightly more complicated version of a meal, like a meal kit at home? What do you think attributed that?
Well, I think it was a deliberate attempt to be different.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're talking about food, and this is very product specific for anyone that's doing research on their products though, it's like, why are you different? Like, why is Woolworths different to Coles? Or, what is the differentiating fact? Like in marketing, they talk about like, what's the blue ocean opportunity, right? Why are you unique? Now, with something like HelloFresh, it's green, which is great for vegetables, right? They've got fresh in the name. They've kind of got that sewn up. So I think we were looking for different areas to operate in. And we were like, it's the kind of, the Uber model will be the same price, but differentiate.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of it is photography. Literally, like, what does the food look like? Because some people are like, I'm not eating that. I just want schnitzel.
Yeah.
Great. We'll do that in Dinnerly.
Yeah.
So I think there's space for both. But I think it kind of, to your question, kind of happened out of a need to try and explore a different territory to get more awareness.
How long down the journey did that come? Was it a few years down the track that Dinnerly launched? And
yeah, it was about 2 years in.
Okay, so relatively early though, like didn't take too long. That logistical challenge of launching, obviously you were more on the marketing side of the business. Would you say that was one of the biggest early challenges for the business, setting up logistically to be able to physically source, deliver,
I think
organize and then send out all the product?
So from an operations perspective, again, one of the great things about being a startup founder is you get to work across everything. So I was customer care, I was logistics, operations, procurement. We then split the business into something that I quite like is like promise and deliver. So deliver is the operations and promise is brand, performance marketing, etc. Logistically, yes, it has challenges, but Dinnerly was more simple. So Marley Spoon, the product is individually wrapped in bags. With Dinnerly, we just put everything in the box. Yeah. So it was actually simpler and faster to produce it. Again, you can imagine the level of governance that goes into operations. Everything is measured, like how long does it take you to take that off the pick, the pick line and put it in. Everything is measured to the second, right? The weight of the ice based on the volume of food. So there's a lot of operational complexity. But no, the biggest challenge was actually, are we going to, and we didn't, but are we going to cannibalize our own install base? Are they different enough? Are we going to accidentally kill our core product? And it never happened through, being very careful and a lot of planning. But that was more my concern is like, is there space in the market for these different products?
Both of them to exist under the same umbrella. Now, on that piece of scaling, obviously it's a theme of the podcast. You guys grew really quickly, obviously acquiring market share, growing in terms of headcount, over 300 staff by the time you IPO'd. In terms of that marketing piece, and then we'll move on to kind of the people and how you scaled that side of the business, because it's always interesting to hear people's takes and lessons and takeaways from all of that. But in terms of like that growth, you first 10 orders, you went down, you spoke to the customers, you signed them up at Bondi Markets. From when you're like, okay, now it's time to actually go properly, what did that look like? What were the first channels, and then how did you expand them? And one thing I really would love you to touch on, if you could, is it's all well and good to, go aggressively and scale, but I've seen so many businesses break by trying to aggressively scale too early. How did you guys know when the right time to really scale a channel was, and then when a right time was to activate a new channel?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We went as hard and fast as we could, again, without breaking any of our core metrics. So we had an acceptable top line CPA that we thought was okay, that was baked into the unit economics of every sale. So we very, very clearly understood that the business doesn't work if over time it increased. So again, back to this daily governance. And I mean, I actually think you're probably much more of an expert in this area than me, but we found that, we had a great run on Facebook, like for a long time.
You were there the golden years.
Yeah, the golden years. And then suddenly it was like, this doesn't work. And you talk to the guys at Facebook and it was like, well, Australia's quite a small market. You've spoken to everyone 40 plus times, you're like, right, okay. It's time. It was, it wasn't really even a choice. It was like,
by necessity, right?
It's a subscription business. You have to keep putting people in the funnel. It's not something that is a set and forget. When you look at the cohort behavior of something like a Netflix, right? It's straight for the trial month, then it drops off a bit, and then it's pretty much flat forever, right? People don't churn out of that product.
Yeah.
But subscription businesses like food, people churn out of for millions of reasons. School holidays, I'm on a diet, I've gone, I don't like the food, whatever it might be, I've lost my job, I've got a new job, I'm dating, so there are so many reasons to drop out. So you have to keep on feeding the funnel. In terms of adding other channels, it was kind of almost impossible not to, because we had maxed out. I think if you can have the luxury of maxing out channels before you add other ones, it's great. But we moved very quickly into having to do like outdoor.
For a business like Marley Spoon and Dinnerly, in terms of when you're going aggressive and trying to acquire market share as quickly as possible, for that CPA acquiring a customer the first time, obviously the real money is made, in lifetime value in a business like this. Like sometimes you'll have people that are, customers for years, and obviously the value of that customer is great. But on that first sale, for a business like Marley Spoon and Dinnerly to work but then be scalable, are you off that first sale? Are you looking to be profitable? Are you looking to break even? Or are you happy to lose money to acquire that first sale? Because on average, every one customer acquired equals however many weeks of subscription.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So your forecast LTV is super important. Now, that particular business model is heavily incentivized by discounting orders 1, 2, and 3. So without going into like the specific dollar values, you massively overspend to acquire a customer. And this is one of the sort of key learnings that I was sort of alluding to earlier. Acquisition and retention are equally as important in a subscription business. You're not, it's very bad news if your customer churns after box 1, right? So, you really have to focus early on customer success, quality. And then, of course, because you're delivering, a highly perishable product around quite a hot country, not today, but generally, there are lots of variances and taste, it changes. So a huge amount of insights were harvested from customers because you really got to move them to box 3, 4. And then you find it's like that. I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's the 5 Stages of Habit. It's a book by Charles Duhigg, I think. And so you have your, I'm interested, the sweet spots in the middle where you have the sort of habitual habit, and then you have habit waning. So something that we focused a lot on is trying to understand signals from the data about when people were about to churn. So an example of that would be, I made a complaint. Bear in mind, I think it's less than a third of people ever complain. They just vanish. They ghost you, right? So when someone complains, you've got to triple that volume of complaints and take it seriously, because it's very rarely singular. Most people just can't be asked, right?
That's a really good point.
So you look at the churn signaling, right? So someone's complained, that's a massive signal, right? Did you deal with it properly? Was there a first time response, et cetera, right? Have they then paused kind of unseasonally? So they're definitely not on holiday, but they've taken a break. Oh, where are they? Or maybe they're with our competitor, right? And then at what point do you take that signal, you then categorize it, and then you have to incentivize that person. So they're creeping out, right? And then that's where you go in. That's where you hit them with some content reactivation. I mean, there's some brands that do that. Are you aware of Chief? They do the protein bars in Australia. Amazing, props to them. Whoever does their CRM and email marketing is a machine. But they do that reactivation piece really well, highly personalized. Hey, we haven't seen you for a while. Try this. Here's $10 off, whatever. Yep. But yeah, so that piece is super important. So long-winded answer to your question, but it's all about retention, because you can acquire customers at any cost, right? Really, you can. If I said to you, do you want this box of food? It's free. You're probably going to say yes. Yeah. But then how do I make sure that you actually become a real customer? Plus I've had to pay, whatever my CPA is. So
plus, cost of the product. So what was the point? And I don't know, from the way you've explained it, I don't know if there was a line in the sand. Obviously, people are going to fall off at all stages. But was there like a, after the fourth box, they're pretty sticky. Like, was there a moment in that journey that you knew we have done pretty well? We're only going to lose, say, 20, 30% from this point onwards?
Yeah, exactly. I can't remember exactly where that cohort behavior is because I haven't been close to the data of that business for a long time. I don't want to do them any disservice. But it was super clear. Yeah. So you would see sort of more aggressive drop-off in the first month. You would obviously see a drop-off at the end of the subsidized product, and then people that stay tend to stay. Yeah. Because why do they stay? You've actually solved their problem. They like the product. You're solving a real need for them, right? You've made cooking more convenient or whatever your product may be. So, it comes back to that. Have we solved the unifying human truth bit? And then they stay. So you see this.
Yeah. In terms of that, in terms of that piece you just spoke about, in terms of looking at the signals, when someone waning, are they about to churn? Have they just churned? Have we not seen them for a while? Does anything come to mind? Obviously, you mentioned like people giving away free boxes or discounts, whatever. Is there one strategy that you guys used that stands out that you thought was, hey, this is pretty aggressive and, I don't know if this is going to be worth it. But is there any customer win back initiative that stands out as something that worked really well?
Yeah, I think, there's some very aggressive ones that never made it to the light of day. But I think it's more to do with, again, if you have ultimately it will come down to a financial offer in that particular business. But what's really important is that you're not overpaying. So the more you pay for a customer, the worse they behave, right?
That is I've never heard someone say it like that. Yeah. But for a subscription business and a business built around repeat purchases, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a bit direct, maybe a bit rude, but it's true, right? So if someone enters into that subscription of their own will, they really want that product, you've solved the problem. So one of the key things was understanding like the severity of the churn. So say you look at an individual and they've been a very loyal customer, but they're about to leave. Why? Whereas if someone's churning, they've only been with you for, say, 6 weeks, you're not going to spend too much necessarily on retaining them. It might be that it just wasn't a good fit. Yeah. So it's all to do with really measuring the size of the win back in direct correlation to their potential LTV.
Yeah. So you have all like formulas and calculations that you can use to make a decision based on historical data, whether it's worth investing a certain amount into acquiring another customer back or not.
Yeah, so we were lucky, right? So we have a team of data scientists, right? But you can easily play with that yourself. I think, it's like the level of sophistication, right? But yeah, it's exactly, there's a lot of number crunching. And then of course testing, right? So some people, you split test all of it. You're like, right, these guys get no incentives. Woolworths do it a lot with their rewards. I ended up in a bucket where I got no rewards for a while. I was like, what's going on? I'm part of the test.
Yeah, you're too good of a customer. You're too easy to please.
Yeah.
On that other side of the business, now obviously you mentioned about it's a great luxury to have a team of data scientists. They help feed this information to the marketing team to be able to make better educated decisions on where to invest money and where not to. That growing of the business in terms of like not just as the marketing function, but 300 plus staff by the time you IPO'd, you being the leader of the marketing function, all of that side of the business, were you also involved in the hiring of many of these, or was that placed on like a HR person? Or
no. So before I answer that, I just don't want to do any disservice to the marketing team. Like they're all very good at data themselves. Yep. So, it wasn't like they're getting spoon-fed their data on a daily basis. So anyone that works in a marketing function, and it was all in-house.
Also no agencies, like your media buy was done internally?
The only media buy that's done externally is outdoor and TV because you can get better rates by using an agency. But in terms of scaling the people, we you would hire your own people. So we did have a, people and culture or PX team. But if you wanted to hire someone, you would hire them. So I certainly probably interviewed, I would say, everyone that came into that team. So, our number one value we had 10 values in the business. Number one value was build the best team. So as a leader of the business, it's your number one responsibility.
Wow.
Before anything else. So before, being data orientated, all these other great values, the number one was build the best team. So we stole the Google's way of hiring. So we hired to our values. So we had 10 different values. Then we'd have a set of questions that were applicable to each different value. And then when you interviewed someone, you would basically be hiring them based on how well, they obviously have a skill assessment, can they do the job? But then the rest of it was very, very values focused. And that would be the same way that you would let people go from the business as well.
It can be the people side of any business is one of the most important functions, if not the most important function, as it's the number one, obviously, value of the business. As someone who's, had to hire and let go and interview a fair amount of people myself, and just having this podcast, I speak to people either like yourself with plenty of experience and probably have interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people, versus, e-com startups hiring their first 5-10 employees. It can be something that can easily go wrong. And we could talk all day about what to do or your processes, but is there any one principle or one thing that stands out or one piece of advice that you'd take away or continue to hold close to you as you go and hire people for your businesses in the future, to just boil it down to one key principle to help get that right more often than not?
You're right. We could talk for hours. I think, don't hire yourself. Basically, if I had to say one thing, it's you have a lot of confirmation bias around, hiring people like you, and not you, one does, right? Because you're we get on and they get it, and that could be completely wrong. So I think that's quite important. Make sure you're actually hiring in line with your values for the job you want them to do at that time as well. So I think there's, particularly in startups and scale ups, I'm a firm believer in that you hire for today. It's great if, someone's going to grow with the business, but you need the job done today. So hire the person that's going to do the job today. Not for if this happens and that happens, then we're going to need them in 2 years' time. It's okay to hire someone and for them then to go. Sounds a bit blunt again, but if you're building a high performing team, they might be on the bench for a while, or they might go and play for another team. That's okay. So hire for the people that you want today and don't hire yourself.
And would you agree? That's a really good point you make. So I'm not sure where you'll go with this, but do you feel like at the start of a journey, the first, say, 0 to 30 employees, are you hiring more all-rounders, just go-getters, more of attitude, and then is it getting more specialized as the team grows, or are you always just trying to look at that example you just said, what do they actually need to do, what's their role today, and just hiring the best fit for that role? Or is there a little bit of an awareness at the start that they're going to have to wear multiple hats and jump around a little bit?
So, I think at early stage, people have to be, so you're really hiring a cultural fit at that point, because it's you're in charge of email marketing, but if I need you to pick up the phone, then you need to do that as well, right? So it's very attitudinal. And I think that the culture of an organization is built in those early hires. And that's by having people that are aligned with the vision and values. And again, I'm pretty process driven, right? It's if they get it, that's fine. You can teach new skills, but, specifically, you don't want someone learning on the job doing Facebook. It's not going to work. It's not going to be. It's going to be a nightmare for them and a nightmare for you. So I think it really depends what it is. I would tend in those roles to be specific, but it's also every business, as you'll be aware, there's no one size fits all, right? And the dynamics of marketing at a meal kit subscription business are very different to any other organization.
I want to ask you this as someone that has worked for big corporate companies and your own startups as well, and you would have experienced and worked with a range of different people and seen different leadership styles and management styles. What I want to ask you is, so what's your take on the difference between a founder or a co-founder and a CEO? Are they the same sort of personality in your experience? Are they different sort of operators? What's your take from your experience on that?
That's a really interesting question, because the founder often is the CEO to start with, right? I think, again, it's a point in the journey. Not everyone who has a great idea and the hustle and the attitude to get a business off the ground can be a CEO. Because often I think you find as you scale, they're very different requirements, because you don't need someone running around full of ideas. Who's your CEO? Your CEO is operating the business. Particularly when you look at scaling to either raising serious amounts of money or IPOing, the business can change. And I think the founder should focus on, a founder should be mature enough maybe to step to the side at the right time. But that said, it's really important in the early stages that the founder gets to set the culture. So I think it depends on the maturity of the individual. Do they know what they don't know? And you see a lot of founder-led businesses will at some point hit this inflection, and then you kind of have to coach or mentor the founder away from being the CEO.
Yeah.
And that's part, I believe, of them learning and developing, particularly younger founders who've had lots of success. They don't want to let go, or they don't believe anyone else can do it. Again, that's kind of more process orientated. But I think everyone should have a crack at being CEO. We shared that role around briefly at Marley Spoon. I wouldn't want to do it for that organization now. And I think it's understanding at what point in the journey you are. Yeah. A lot about founder maturity there and trust.
I think the self-awareness piece as well that you mentioned is really important. You strike, obviously we've known each other for about an hour, but you strike me as the type of founder that could be a CEO based on your skill set and kind of your understanding of things. You said you wouldn't want to play that role in the business today, but is like in terms of that role as the chief executive officer, do you feel like that's something that you would enjoy, or are you more would prefer like the CMO side of the business?
Yeah, so I definitely today, yeah, fine. I mean, I'm not the CEO at Mist. My business partner JC is, and I'm very happy with that. I do ops, marketing, everything else.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of joint CEOs. Just fundamentally, I don't think it's a great idea. I think someone should be responsible.
Yeah.
But you obviously have a very strong leadership team. At Marley Spoon, I wasn't experienced enough. And that's why I wouldn't have wanted to do that. And I didn't have that opportunity. And I think, being self-aware, losing some of the attitude is really important. I could do it now. I'm older. I've seen more problems. I've got more skills.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of a rite of passage. But that said, everyone's different, right? There's amazing CEOs who, there's a litany of them in tech, right, who started their businesses, like Zuckerberg would be one. But what do they have around them? Amazing mentors, amazing leadership, people they trust, a really strong bench of people to make sure they know what they're doing and they've learned and grown with the business. So I think it's a moment in time.
Yeah. For me, like, the journey we had and the really fast success and growth we had, like, I feel like as well, and I'm coming at it from like the young e-com founder lens as well. So it's a little bit different, obviously a lot less mature in the approach initially going into it. But for me, it was a bit of an ego check when I realized, because, everyone, visualizes CEO as the title and thinks, that's the be all and end all. But I realized, and maybe it is like, maybe in 10 years, I'll want to do that, but just not even in terms of what do I think my skill set lends itself to. I don't think being a CEO would be it. Like, I couldn't think of anything really worse for my personality type and the way I like to work right now as being a CEO. But that was a big, like a little bit of an ego check for me to realize, holy shit, maybe CEO isn't for me.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like you're pretty self-aware, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got there yourself. What you don't want is a CEO running a business who is unable to see that, right? It could be potentially very dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think, being the CEO founder of a small to mid-sized business is fine. The CEO who is trying to IPO a business
Very different.
is very, very different skill. It's just different skill set, right?
Yeah.
So I think unless you go through that and learn it, you don't really want to be playing, because there's too much at risk as well, right? So, if you're taking on tens of millions of dollars of investors' money, and really you're just an amazing operator. Maybe it's time to learn and move forward. But I think you're right. It is an ego thing. Everyone wants CEO on their business card or on their LinkedIn, and then it's like, well, be careful what you wish for.
Before we move on to Mist, we'll talk about that next. What was that IPO process like, and how long were you working on it before it went live? That actual transition from just privately backed company to openly traded.
So one of the things that the financial team and leaders at Marley Spoon were very keen on is that the business was always in good enough shape to IPO. So in terms of governance, in terms of reporting, the business was always good to go. So a lot of businesses are like, right, we're going to IPO. Oh my God, we've got 5 years of technical debt and admin to fix. So we never had that. It's a very judicial process led by consultants and lawyers. We did it really quickly. I think it took about 6 to 8 months. Wow. It's very expensive. I would say, again, it's one of those things, people want to ring the bell and, it feels good. But, it's similar to what we were talking about before. Why do you do it? There has to be a very good reason to IPO a business. And that's, multitude of reasons, but because you want to, and you want that picture on Bridge Street ringing the bell is not a good one.
Going through something like that, and a lot of the roles that you have had, I imagine come attached with them a lot of stress and pressure. Yeah. How do you navigate those periods when you're going through that? I'm sure it could be madness, and burnout is a really common thing amongst entrepreneurs and C-suite executives. What's your experience with those sorts of things been like?
I think it's really important and to acknowledge it. And I think the world is getting much, much better over the last 10 years of, men sitting around talking about stress, right? It's really important. And women, of course, but, particularly for us guys, I think things have changed a lot. Burnout, I've definitely been burnt out, absolutely exhausted, put a lot of stress on myself. I'm sure you've been in similar situations. How to deal with it, I think is, I was doing a lot of long distance running. So I had my sort of therapy through sport and getting out. It's really important to switch off. But look, it's real. And, it's real because you care a lot about your business. And it's another skill that a founder has to learn is, at what point do you become less productive? I think Jeff Bezos says in one of his interviews that, basically his job is to make like 2 or 3 decisions a day. And I think, obviously it's a different ball game.
The weight of each decision is massive.
Yeah, but that's it. So when you're leading a business, it's like you need to be, again, very related to what stage you're at, but you need to be making good decisions. You don't want to be making 100 decisions a day. So I think when you realize the importance of your role in the stage of the business, you can free yourself up a bit. But I think it's a skill you have to learn.
Do you subscribe to that decision fatigue? Like you hear the stories about, Steve Jobs wearing the same thing every day because he didn't want to have to make a decision on the outfit to wear. Is that a real thing?
I think it might depend on the person. But yeah, I can see, like, I think Zuckerberg does the same thing. I think those are fun ones, but I think the process around making decisions in the business can be very process orientated, really. You have clear strategy, you have OKRs, right? So you have a process, you have things that you're working towards. It helps making decisions to be less on the fly. You've got clear strategic goals. Everyone in the company is bought into them. Then you're not making constant decisions all the time, and you're picking the ones that are actually strategically moving the business forward, working on the business, not in the business, to use that phrase. I think that's important. But yeah, I think there would be decision fatigue. I don't always wear the same clothes, however.
Not quite at that level yet. Maybe one day. Now moving on to like your current venture, Mist. Talk to me about that. Obviously, you're someone who immigrated to Australia, so I kind of see the link there. But talk to me about, or explain for the people listening what Mist is, if you could first, and then how this opportunity came up and why you thought this is a problem I want to try solve.
Yeah. So Mist is the sort of elevator pitch. It's an app that is targeted at international students, specifically moving around the world, to make their transition into a new country easier. So as an international student, of which there are about 8 million that move around the world every year. About 1 million of them come to Australia. So it's a massive, mega niche.
Massive market for it.
Yeah.
A million out of 8.
Yeah. So the main countries are Australia, the US, Canada, and the UK. And these students come from China, India, Nepal, Latin America, and Southeast Asia generally. So international education is the third largest contributor to Australia's GDP. It's absolutely massive, but we don't really think about it.
Yeah, unless you're in that space, it's easy to forget about.
So I was certainly not really aware of it. So to answer your question, how did it come about? Met a guy through a mutual friend. He had worked in the international education space whilst he was at ANZ Bank. He was wanting to build a startup, and he was like, "Are you interested in getting involved?" And I was kind of doing some consulting, not really, I was kind of floating around a bit. I said, "Well, tell me about it." He kind of briefly gave me a similar story as I just gave you. I was like, "Oh wow, this is like a mega niche. This is an opportunity to build a fintech brand." And I was like, "Right, is it direct to consumer or?" And he was like, "Well, it's a consumer brand, but the beauty really is that we can acquire customers through agents, right? So it's a slightly different model." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm in." So there was a bit of sort of dancing around the handbags a little bit with him. And it really came down to, if we can raise money, I'll come on as a co-founder and help you with the business. And so that happened about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
I was like, the business needs to be kind of funded. We went out and secured some funding to build the roadmap out, and I've been in the business ever since.
So when you talk about there's 8 million people, total service market, like international students around the world, is Mist an international company? Obviously, when I went on the website to do research, it's all speaking to Australians, right? It's localized. But are you guys, is this a worldwide venture, or is it just Australia to start with?
So it's really important. It is a worldwide venture. Our investors aren't interested in Australia as a singular endpoint.
Yep.
What happens is, so you've got those 4 countries that people move to, UK, Canada, US, and Australia. It's pretty much evenly split. US is marginally bigger, as you'd expect. And so what we do is we want to present Mist at the source. So we don't really care where the student is going, but we're in Australia, so we're starting with Australia. But we will very quickly add on US, Canada, and the UK. We really need to do that to hit like venture scale.
Yeah, because as someone that's very much been like a D2C marketer for a lot of your career, how do you guys go about acquiring customers, getting brand recognition? Is it something that you're working with these agents, or can you work with universities directly, colleges, or are you trying to activate and hit these people on their social media like another business would?
Yeah, so it's a good point. You and I both understand the cost of D2C, right? So when we were talking about those extensive, metrics around cost per acquisition or ROAS, it's pretty much impossible to effectively, for us anyway, to scale that business D2C. It would cost a massive amount of money.
Yeah.
Right? So 80% of the volume of international students go through agents, right? So we've done deals with all of the big aggregator agents. And so then, I'm trying to play this game of building a consumer brand whilst approaching it through the agents. There's 2 really important groups of people in this. One is the student, the other is the parent, because these are still quite young, moving country, English as a second language. So everything is done through the agents. We talk to the agents, we acquire the customer, we come in as early as the letter of offer stage, and then we're like, we'll help you with your banking, overseas health cover, we'll help you with your visa, proof of funds, we'll send you a SIM card. We do all this kind of boring stuff very early in the life cycle, and then hopefully maintain a longer relationship with them. That's when the good kind of fun marketing will kick in.
Yeah.
The retention, the content, the brand building, the word of mouth, the referral, all the good stuff that needs to happen. But it's a massive advantage to us to be able to acquire customers through agents.
Yeah, direct, growth through partnerships is going to be a lot. As you said, just realistically, if we talk about the cost it would to find these, how many people are on Facebook as an example every day? How are we going to find these people? So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds in terms of being able to market it at the source with the partnerships. How do you envision this scaling? If you talk about, okay, I'm sure when you sat down with the investors, you talk about, okay, here's the, total serviceable market, as you said, this is like the ideal scenario. Let's say 5-10 years in the future. I'm not sure how long your roadmap is.
Yep.
What does that look like if this business is able to achieve that? And like, how do you make it happen? Like, is this something that is like a multi-year play for you? What's your thoughts behind it? It's a world that I'm curious about because I live near Sydney Uni, but I know nothing about.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's, for me, I want to move as fast as possible. We're restricted by how fast we can build the tech.
Okay.
In terms of the acquisition play, I would look to onboard, roughly 10,000 users by the end of the year, 100,000 by the end of next, and then we can scale from there. That's just within Australia.
Yeah.
The real key to expanding the user base is the geographical expansion, because currently, in theory, we're only offering a product to 20% of the market because the rest of them are going somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's a very fast, aggressive acquisition play because, something I was thinking about on the way over actually is like, we're trying to build a product for today, but really you should always be building products for 5 years' time.
Yeah.
Right? So are people going to need Australian BSB and account numbers in 5 years' time? I don't know. Not if, 80% of the banks in Japan have just started using XRP. So they've got massive infrastructure play to be using Ripple, right? So you're going to have real-time payments and remittance, with cryptocurrency, right? That's happening. That happened like last week. So, without sort of going massively into the crypto side of things, like payments is changing daily.
Yeah.
Right? It just is. So for me, it's about moving really, really fast because I don't know if, how people, we help people move money. We help them with all of this these sort of jurisdictional issues. So I don't know where that's going to be in the future.
On that, crypto Web3 space, it's a industry that you've spent a little bit of time in yourself quite heavily. What did you learn about the space or about where you see the future of that space going from your time really heavily invested in Web3?
Yeah. So fundamentally, I think it's like anything. It's very early. Fundamentally, I'm really interested in like the picks and shovels of the sort of Web3 space. I think there's a lot of noise around the sides, which is fun. I think the big adoption will be through gaming. I spent some time in gaming. We've got some very successful companies in Australia in Web3 gaming, Illuvium, Immutable. I worked for a company called Myria, Gala Games. They're all really interesting, but fundamentally, I'm a big believer in the technology.
Yeah.
So, I'm very interested to see where it goes. I'm a big fan.
On that space, obviously, anytime crypto goes into a bear market, like mainstream people lose interest or they lose a bit of money. It's so up and down. Like, what do you foresee as the major challenges or problems with the whole Web3 space, even if it's just on like a trust basis with mainstream consumers? What do you foresee is the big challenge or hurdle that the industry needs to overcome before it can really become mainstream?
So I think it's trust and utility, right? So if people look at, if you're buying meme coins for fun, that's great. That's like betting at the tab, right? It is, right? But
even harder to predict.
Yeah, but it's fun, right? But I don't think that's what's going to drive the industry. When people talk about mass adoption, they look at gaming, which is interesting because it ties back to my experience with Rockstar. But gaming is massive. The technology in Web3 around fungibility lends itself to crypto gaming. It's nowhere near there, right?
Yeah,
it's probably 5-10 years away.
We got excited for a little bit that it was right here.
Yeah.
The whole meta rebrand from Facebook was maybe jumping the gun a little bit.
Yeah, it's not quite there in terms of quality for mass adoption, right? Until you've got, people playing, a Call of Duty level game or a Grand Theft Auto game that just happens to be on Web3. But also, like, what's the point? What's the utility? Yeah. So in terms of where it's really interesting is the custody of your own assets, the movement of money at zero cost and high speed. I can, if you're in the UK and I'm here and I have to use Swift, which is a company that's been around 60 years to send you cash, they're going to charge me. Whereas I could just ping it to you over X. Yeah. Or I could just send it to you as USDT pseudo-anonymously immediately, right? It's just, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So that has utility.
Real life utility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's useful. It works. It's robust. The last point on that is that you then have these sort of Bitcoin maxis, who are people who fundamentally believe that, you know, it's the most valuable place to store your wealth, right? Because obviously fiat currency is getting constantly debased. So why would you not just store your assets in something that's stable-ish? But, you know, I mean, if you look at Bitcoin over the last 18 months, has gone up 160%. There's no other asset class in the world that has delivered that return if you're up for it, right? Or you could be in the US or South America where the dollar is just getting debased massively. Like the US, again, not financial advice, it's not you know, I'm not a macroeconomic guy, but they're going to have to print trillions of dollars in the US.
It's scary.
That's not good. That's not good for anyone. So I think it's a fascinating space, and I think everyone should look at it if they're interested. There are risk-adverse ways of being exposed to crypto, and I think, you know, the more that I learn about payments, you know, what people really want is again, it's speed and cost. Yeah. So if there's a great way of doing that, that isn't involving legacy and banks, why not?
And why there is a level of risk, and, you know, it's all novel technology. So unless someone's a bit technical, they might be a little bit, you know, hesitant to invest the time in that. Regardless if it's in 2 months, 2 years, or 10 years, it's coming. So you better, even if it's just something casually on the side, start familiarizing with yourself, because it's going to become a great tool for not only business, but personal real life utility as well.
Oh, 100%.
So it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. And so here's another point that I came across the other day. So AI and AI agents will never and can't trade in fiat currency. Right. So if you believe that AI is happening, which I think it clearly is, right, the only way that AI agents and structures can trade is with cryptocurrency. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. It's not going to be Bitcoin, like it's not going to be a blue chip asset class, but it might be XRP. So, you know, that is fundamentally happening. So there will have to be a crypto scene around payments, remittance, storage of assets, because that is the only way that these agents, or whatever you want to call it, will be able to trade. So it has to happen.
I agree. I was, you know, I go through phases like a lot of people where I'm really closely following it. On XRP, did they settle with the SEC case? Is that still ongoing?
It's still
ongoing.
Yeah.
Well, they were meant to have like multiple dates where it was meant to be resolved by.
Yeah. So it should have been resolved. Again, I'm not following it super closely because I'm flat chat at work.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you know, when you get into these things, you lose a few days researching, right? But I think that's why, despite the news in Japan with XRP that's been going on, you still haven't seen a price hike. So XRP is flat, not moving. Everyone's just sitting there
to see what happens.
So I think when the SEC ruling is complete, something good could happen.
Is XRP something you're holding, or?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. More just out of curiosity. Yeah, it's not going to change my life, but. I think it's fun when you have exposure in an asset class. You watch it, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it kind of passes you by.
Yeah.
So it's more of an educational investment.
Yeah. Good way to look at it. And then, like you said, if it does go well, then beautiful.
Cool.
But if not, like, it's not going to ruin your life if it doesn't go the way that, you know, people kind of put money into that and cross their fingers and hope that it, you know, changes their life. Now, we'll start to wrap up. I just want to ask a few last questions before we do, because obviously you've worked in all these big businesses, whether it be as an employee or as a co-founder, and built out these big teams. But you've also had, you know, during the COVID period, you had a little bit extra time up your sleeve. You started like a completely bootstrap, like startup, Wavetree. You sell like kids products, raincoats and boots and that sort of stuff. Yeah. What was kind of like the main, you know, whether it be just like lesson or experience that you took away from doing something like a little bit more grassroots level to the stuff you usually work on?
Yeah. It's a lot harder than you think. And, you know, so myself and my friend Will, who co-founded that, like, we've got young kids. We thought it'd be a bit of fun. Yeah. We had a lot of fun, you know, working on the product development. And he wanted to build the website. He's both quite techie. So we kind of did it as like a tech project for fun. And then we were like, oh my God, we've got all this product. I think
now we got to sell it.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway, without being too negative, it's like it's hard. It's really hard. And just because, in my case, I've run a huge business, an e-commerce business from a marketing perspective, that doesn't mean that you can just suddenly sit down at the tools and your product's going to fly off the shelf.
Very different, right?
And it was, it's funny talking to you. I was looking at the work that you do with your mentoring as well. It's like, I think we could probably do with a bit of that ourselves because, it's hard. And it's not, I think if you do get an overnight success in e-com, it's rare, right? You have to have your principles and your fundamentals, right? So look, it's been a lot of fun. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
We'll still keep plugging away at it. Again, raincoat's very seasonal, probably not, it's not an evergreen product. But look, we've had a lot of fun with it, but boy, it's hard work and Facebook doesn't work.
Yeah, like I actually think that Facebook's having a little bit of a resurgence compared to where it was the last 18 months.
Yeah.
But 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if you started a business, just to say an e-com business, 1 to 3 to 5 products, right?
Yeah.
You could start a business just with Facebook.
Yeah.
You cannot do that anymore today.
Yeah.
You need to build outside of Facebook, and Facebook is the amplification.
Yeah.
Amplification.
Yeah,
I said it and I'm like, that sounds so wrong. It's a tool.
Yeah.
Now, there are some people, highly skilled drop shippers, that are testing 10 plus products a week that can make it work from day dot. But really, and like we spoke about briefly before we started recording, the success you and his partner have had with their business, like it's the content piece first nowadays that is so powerful. And just like with you guys expanding to outdoor, you take the principles that work best with paid because you've got the data, then you amplify it with outdoor. You take the principles, the messaging, what really resonates with your customers from the organic content piece, and then you put that in ads, and then it supercharges it. But for people with limited budgets when they start, Facebook can be something. It is like gambling as well. You give it a budget, go find all these customers. You haven't really built any brand or awareness outside of that. Maybe you'll hit it good, but a lot of the time there's a lot of the trial and error. Like there is a framework that needs to be followed. And I think that's why the business, like in terms of me, the mentoring, I'm getting so many people reach out to me because maybe they've tried and they've realized, hey, it isn't as easy as it seems. But I think in terms of like my biggest value is like freedom. And I think if you're passionate enough to stick with it and try new things and give yourself permission to not necessarily be the best at something when you start, then I still think it's a great tool to be able to use to change your life.
Oh, I think, absolutely amazing. It's fun. I love it. Obviously I've spent, the last 15 years working in e-commerce really, or performance marketing. I think though your point is, it's hard work. It's not necessarily, it's not inexpensive. Which I think a lot of people think, we're just going to spin up a brand. And, it can be if you have, great UGC, great content that is performance content.
It's got to be,
So, and you work really hard at it.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan and I wish everyone a lot of success. But, it was almost like an interesting lesson for me because I kind of thought it would be easier. So I feel quite humble.
Yeah. But it's like, it's just that like, the same as me, like I'm really great in that like 0 to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million. Like that's my, obviously we've had multiple years, like 8-figure business and stuff, but really that process for me is my bread and butter. If I could be like, okay, I've done really well in this, I'm going to come work for you and do it, in an organization with hundreds of employees, I'd probably be a little bit out of my depth and not really fucking know what I'm doing either.
Yeah.
So it's good fun. Now, last question, like, considering we do have a lot of people listening that are so, startup focused and are in that position, either they're working a job where they're not feeling fulfilled and like you may be getting itching feet, I want to go do something for myself. What would just your one, word of advice be to people that are thinking of starting their first business?
Yeah, it's another great question. I think, you always want to boil it down to one thing, but I think it's probably, you've got to really want to do it or believe in your product. I think if you're doing it because you think it's going to be a quick win, it's not going to work because you have to really invest a huge amount of yourself, not just physically, time, but emotionally. And we spoke a little bit about that earlier. So do it. It's fun, and do something that you actually want to do and believe in because it's not going to happen in 2 weeks. you're going to have to be talking about it for months and years. So yeah, try and believe in it. And also, not one thing, but surround yourself with people that can help, because, talk to you, engage a mentor, don't do it on your own. Because it can be quite lonely out there. So I would say try and do it with a mate or a
100%.
partner, and because then you get to share in the ups and the downs, and that's fun, right? Have fun with it.
Couldn't agree more. Two of the things that have made this journey more rewarding and more enjoyable, because, success is a big, variable in terms of your level of enjoyment. First thing, like, I've done businesses by myself and with co-founders. For me personally, I'd rather do it with co-founders. The highs, just as much as you want someone there in the low moments to, get yourself out of trouble, it's those celebrations. They mean so much more when you're doing it with someone you care about. So I agree with that. And then as well, like mentors, not just if you're just starting, find a mentor, maybe like myself, right? Or if you're where I am, I still have mentors that I go to that I'm like, they are so far ahead of me and I want to learn from them. And it's like, it's the biggest cheat code. Like, if I try and figure it all out on my own, it might take 10 years where I could, spend 6 months with a great mentor and be, put myself years ahead. So I couldn't agree more. Now, for people that wanted to follow along with what you're doing, I know you're on LinkedIn and stuff, where's the best place if anyone's like, damn, I really learned a lot from Dave and I just want to kind of keep in touch or keep following where he is? Where would be the best place you think for someone to follow along? For
sure, thanks. I think anyone can just find me on LinkedIn, Dave Malcolm. More than happy to catch up with people when I can. If anyone's got any questions. So that's probably the easiest place to get me. You can find me on Instagram as well, but it's not really very business content. So yeah.
Give me over your personal life.
Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Dave, look, I know you're a really busy guy and you've got a lot on your plate. So really, you've been super generous. An hour and a half. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And excited to put this out and for people to learn. I know when we do episodes like this, the messages I get are always like, dude, it's so good, because sometimes someone like yourself can be a little bit more technical than the way I speak, just because of your experience. So it's great to have people with the experience like you have, Ian. So really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I think we've had a good chat.
Cheers. It was really good. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or you got something out of it, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, do your friends a favor and share this with them, and they can come along on this journey with us. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.